and I lead the tests and trials and the Sustainable Farming Incentive Pilot team. So welcome along to today's webinar. So today's webinar is going to cover annual declarations, amendments, payment holds, and then we're going to give you a brief update in terms of where we are on the environmental land management schemes and what we'll be rolling out later this year. And then at the end, we're going to have a brief Q&A. We will be recording today's session just so that we can send out the recording to anybody that couldn't join us and would like to listen in, or again, if you'd like to listen back. Next slide, please. So just a bit of housekeeping. I'm sure you're all very familiar with this now. So you will all be on mute. So you'll be able to see the panelists here that's here to give you the presentation update on where we are in the pilot on some of these issues and to answer some of your questions, but you won't be able to see each other. However, we do have the Q&A function open. So if you are keen to ask a question, there's a little icon that's shown on screen at the bottom that you can press and you could submit your question. What I'd advise is please do wait until you've heard all the presentations, because your question may be answered in the presentation itself. And I'll give you a couple of minutes just to review the questions, because one that you may have wanted to ask may have already been asked on there. And at the end, we'll run through as many of those as we can and answer those for you. If you are having problems with any of the functions of the webinar today, please do put a note in the chat and we'll help you with that. And we will try and answer as many of those questions that we can. But if you do have a specific question about your agreement that you'd like to talk to us about, you could either email us at SFI Pilot Learning or the Rural Payments Agency. We've got the email addresses up there, but we'll also show them at the end, and we will circulate the slides so you can look at them afterwards. Thanks, Liz. If you can move to the next slide, please. So what are we trying to do today? So today's webinar came on the back of the 3 webinars that we've held very recently on updating you with our plans for the environmental land management schemes and what we're going to be rolling out over the next couple of years. And there was some questions that came up on annual declarations, on the amendment process, and some on payment holds. So what we said is, following those webinars, we'd hold some bespoke webinars, and if you wanted an update on what we're doing and where we're up to, we'd give you that. And that is what today is really all about. So not only are we going to give you an update, we're going to tell you what we've learned, because being part of the pilot is a learning exercise and we're learning with you about what works and what doesn't work. So we're going to go through the annual declaration, the amendment process and the payment hold process, what we've done in the pilot and how it's working, and what to expect if you are on a payment hold, some of the reasons behind that and how we use those payment holds, for example. And then at the end, we'll just touch on, for those of you that didn't have the opportunity to join the webinars that we had to provide the update on what's been rolled out later this year, I will just briefly touch on that at the end before we go into question and answers. So we have the next slide, please. So I'd like to hand over to Liz in my team, who's going to take you through annual declarations. Liz.
Hi, welcome everyone. I'm just here to whiz you through annual declarations. Many of you would have encountered them. Now you're a year or almost a year through the pilot. And we've heard that you wanted to hear a little bit more about why we use them and what the process is. So we've got a couple of slides here for you. The annual declaration is a legal confirmation that you're meeting the agreement terms and conditions. And this is a new approach that we're testing in the pilot. So it's kind of an extra check, that legal confirmation from you that you're completing your agreement as per your terms and conditions, which could reduce the need for other types of monitoring checks for us. So you need to do this annually, usually 10 months into your agreement, to confirm for the full 12 months. Next slide, please, Amy. Thank you. Here, the approach is pretty simple. As you can see, you notified that amendment window opens and your annual declaration will then be ready after a month. You can log into your Royal Payment Service account where you can tick that you confirm and make that annual declaration, or any problems or queries you can create a query form and the RPA will look into that. And that's your annual declaration done. And then on the next slide, the process for the RPA is that we notify you that your amendment window is opening. The declaration is then available. You can then, like I say, log in to complete your declaration or submit the query form. We'll look into those for you, and then the annual declaration check is complete. Normally there are some chasing going on throughout the process, because we don't want you to miss your deadlines for your annual declaration. So like I say, most people have had the opportunity to complete their annual declaration, and only a very small amount are outstanding and being followed up. So thank you for this. That really helps. Like I say, we do chase around 40%, but we know that kind of the idea is that most people will leave it to the deadline. It's only a tick box, so many wait to the last couple of days, but we just want to make sure that you don't miss it. We have had some query forms submitted, but they're normally resolved pretty quickly. And we've got around 49 annual declarations to be completed this month. So if you have an April 2021 start date, do log in before the end of the month to complete yours. And as I mentioned, this is a new process for the pilot, and there's lots for us to learn about it, how you found it, and how the RPA found it on their side as well. Overall, the process has worked well, but we're keen to learn and refine further where needed. So far, following your feedback, we've made some changes to the wording on the annual declaration just to make sure it's clearer. So even though the declaration is at 10 months, it is to cover the full 12 months. We've also heard feedback from you that sometimes the notifications are a bit too far in advance, and therefore we need to send a reminder, but it's easy to forget when we ask you to submit your annual declaration, but it's not open yet. So we're looking at ways to improve this as well. And while we've been undertaking the annual declaration process, we've been drawing up our internal guidance and training staff alongside that, so we can learn in real time with real cases. This hasn't caused any delays, and like I say, the process has worked quite smoothly. But we do have more to learn, and we're holding some learning activities over the next few weeks and months, and would like to hear from you about your experience. So that's it for annual declarations, and I'll hand over to Sam shortly to take you through amendments. Thanks.
Thanks, Liz, and afternoon, everyone. So I'm just going to take you through the amendment process that we've been working through. And obviously, as I'm sure most of you are aware, sort of making an amendment mid-term through a 3-year agreement, or through a mid-term through any agreement, that is quite a new approach for us, and something that we haven't done in our previous scheme. So this is quite a steep learning curve on both sides. So in terms of amendments, there are 2 types of amendments. There's the amendments when the RPA may need to change or update your agreement, and that could be, if they've, some mapping updates or something that's come from site visits, or indeed if you tell us about a change in circumstance. So if you notify us of any changes mid-term for amending your agreement or updating your details, then that's that needs to be reflected within your agreement to make sure that it is correct and meets your the terms and conditions. And then obviously the other amendment, the sort of significant amendment and significant change, is when you need to when you wish to, in your annual amendment window, change your agreement. So, for example, putting in different standards or adding in standards, if you want to put some more land in, or change the level of ambition that you have in your agreement. So those are the 2 types of amendments that we're working on, and I'll just go through how both of those have been working and what we've been doing. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. So the RPA, the first set of amendments, The RPA obviously keep an ongoing sort of monitor of agreements to look to make sure that the information within the agreement is right from what they've got, maybe on the Rural Land Register, or information you've sent in to us. And so we update those if we need to. And again, as I say, if you've written in and told us of changes that we need to reflect in your agreement. So quite often we'll be looking at different maps and making sure that we've got the right amount of land recorded on the agreement that matches the land that you have in your rural land register, to make sure that we've got the correct amount in the agreement and that we obviously pay you the right amount as well. So sometimes that means that we have to go through a process of remapping land parcels and putting them back into your agreement. The RPA may need to come back to you to check different things. So if you've told us some additional information, we may need to check that, or we may need to check with you following updates that we've done internally. And then obviously that could may give rise to a change to the area that's entered in a particular standard, and it could amend your the payment that we need to make to you. So that's sort of one of the initial processes. And as you can see on the right hand side, up so far up to, I think, pretty much up to today, so the first year in the pilot, we've had about 185 changes, so updates to the agreements from when they started, that we've made internally from the internal work that we've done. And then we've also processed 27 changes in circumstances that have been notified to us that have come in. So that's how that's sort of the process for the RPA amendments. If we move on to the next slide, we've got a bit more information on amending your actual agreements. So during the amendment window, when you've got the 2 months where you have the option of adding or removing standards or changing a level of ambition, or perhaps the amount of land that you've got ready for year 2, these are the different types of changes that we've had. So you can see in the tables that we've got there's been a fair number of changes, so just over 100 changes to agreements up to this point. And it's quite encouraging to see that we've had quite an increase in the land that's coming in. Quite a few of you have increased your levels of ambition, and some done both as well, and also putting in more land parcels or adding in more standards into agreements ready for year 2. So as part of that process, so once the amendment window opens and you've done your annual declaration, we're also in the background processing these changes to make sure that we've got them in place and ready for year 2 of your agreement. If we move on to the next slide, I'll just give you then a bit more information about what we're learning from this. So as I've mentioned, this is quite a new process for us in terms of making amendments midterm, and it has been quite a steep learning curve. We've had to do quite a bit of work sort of in adapting our internal process as we go through that. Once we've got through sort of the annual declaration, then starting to look at the amendments. So we've done quite a lot of work with our internal guidance and systems to update those to make it a bit more efficient. We have had we do quite a lot of work together between ourselves, the RPA and Defra working together when changes come through, and sometimes we have to look back to the policy and see how that works with what we'd initially intended. So there's been quite a bit of liaison and working through that, and we've taken this opportunity through the pilot to train up lots of our operatives into the new scheme, because this is the first opportunity. We've really had to test this at scale before we obviously start working on our full schemes in the wider program. So we've also had to do some process improvement to make that work, to try and make it work smoothly as we go along. And we're quite aware that the communications that go out to you need to tell you what's happening and why things are happening. So we've been doing quite a bit of work and learning based on the feedback that we've had from actually just processing, and obviously some of you that have written to us and given us feedback on how the process has been going so far. So it is a real, it has been a really good learning opportunity as we sort of make our way through this first year of changes as we go into year 2. So if we can move on to the next slide, I'm going to give you just sort of a summary on the impacts, because we know that a number of you have notified us that you've made changes and are waiting to hear. So wanted to say thank you for your patience. Some of them have taken, the majority of amendments have gone through quite quickly, quite smoothly, but we know that some have taken a little bit longer than we'd originally intended. So thank you for those of you that have had that and have had to wait a bit longer. But I can rest assured that the RPA are working on them. And quite importantly, if you have submitted an amendment, particularly amendment to your agreement, so additional land and or standards or changing a level of ambition, and you've put that in within the amendment window period, but you haven't heard anything, or you haven't had a new agreement come through, and your sort of year 2 date is fast approaching, don't worry, because it will be effective from the start date, even if we've gone past that start date, obviously subject to our sort of eligibility criteria, but it is just a case of us working through those agreements, making sure that we've got them right and got them correct. But if you get your request in good time in that amendment window, it will be there, and we will have it effective from the start of the agreement. As always, if you would like a progress update, if you haven't had any, or wondering what's going, do email us at the Rural Payments, the standard email. And as I said before, it has been quite a good learning process, but we're looking to streamline it, so as we sort of complete this first year and then work towards year 2 of the pilot, we'll be doing a lot more work to try and streamline that process even further. So as we roll it out into the full scheme, as SFI approaches its year anniversary later this summer, and as I say, as we come to year 2 in the pilot, we can make improvements on that. And I think, and as Liz mentioned, in respect to the annual declarations, we're also going to be doing quite a bit more learning activities with you all over the coming year to get some feedback and to understand, how the experience has gone for you, and what you thought has worked well or not quite so well. So that we can really feed that back into the scheme design. And just a note, just finally, that obviously, if you do have experiences or thoughts, make sure you put them in your learning journal so that they're there for future use and to refer back to if we need them. So that's about amendments. And then I'm also just going to give you an update on payment holds. So if we could move to the next slide and go on to the next one. Thank you very much. So payment holds. So again, part of the new process is our quarterly payments. So it's quite different to how the previous schemes have run, where it's been an annual payment and an annual agreement without any changes. So as we're making payments quarterly, we will sometimes use payment holds, and particularly if there are potential concerns over fraudulent activities. If there's been an amendment that's meant a business has changed or split and merged, and we've had, luckily from a learning perspective, we've had a few of those come through in the pilot where business activities have changed, or we've had to make amendments. So we're able to use the payment hold function to be able to make sure that we sort of do a reconciliation and get that right before we finalize it. Sometimes if we've had a follow-up from a site visit, so some of you that have had the site visit process or the remote site visits, if we've had a follow-up and there's been an outstanding activity or something that we're working on together with you on that, we might put the payment hold in just to make sure that when we get to the final payment, we make that correctly for you. And also where any amendments that have been made have reduced the level of the agreement. So if you've had to take land out of the pilot, or if you've needed to make an amendment, we use that sort of final payment as a for the year as a way of making sure we get that correct. And of course, we have had luckily in the pilot very few cases, but if we didn't have an annual declaration come in within the right time, again, until we've had that confirmation, it's difficult for us to complete that first year. So there could be a payment hold put in that place. So that's sort of the main reasons that we would have payment holds on the policy. If we go on to the next slide, please. Just from an impact perspective, if you do have a payment hold put onto your policy, the RPA will write to you and will confirm to you that a payment hold has been put on and the reasons for that. And our team are updating everybody that has those in place on a fortnightly basis at minimum, if not before. Again, we're learning how these work, how they work in practice, how it works with you, the sort of notification period, how long it takes. And we are reviewing our letters and to make sure that when we do write to you and confirm that you're you have a payment hold in place, that you sort of know why that's happened, what we're doing, and the sort of timescales around that as well. So we are working on that, and as I say, very much like the rest of it, it's been a really good learning process for us to make sure that we can give you the best service, and we can process these types of holds or the reasons behind these as quickly as we can, you know, and get agreements completed for the first year. As with the amendments, if you've got any queries, do contact the RPA, and we've got a team on hand that regularly, you know, all the time review those and tie them all together. So if you are concerned about that you haven't heard or you've had a payment hold in place, do send a query through to the RPA. So I think that's sort of a quick run through of those areas, and obviously we'll have chance for Q&As in a minute. But before we finish, I think, Louise, I'm going to hand back to you because I think you were going to update us a little bit more on the recent update of all of the schemes and particularly how that impacts the pilot. So I'll hand back to you if that's okay.
Thank you very much indeed, Sam, for going through that. So I will take us through a brief update. I appreciate that some of you may have joined our recent webinars. I've heard this. I'll keep this very short. So at the end of January last month, we published some documents on gov.uk that set out what is going to be available this year and in 2024 in terms of the environmental land management schemes. So as part of that document, we published a prospectus that set out the full range of actions and under what schemes there will be available. It set out the 6 new actions that's going to be added to the sustainable farm incentive. So we already have the scheme live with 3 standards that you can apply for that is separate from the pilot, but we are into those 3. We will be including another 6 slides going forward, and they're going to be available later this year, as well as the existing 3 standards. We told you about, it tells you about the evolution of countryside stewardship, how we're going to keep countryside stewardship going and have further offers of the countryside stewardship, but also build in more flexibility and continue along the lines of simplicity that we've been trying to build into the stewardship scheme. And also that we'll be opening a second round of landscape recovery later this year. So what does it mean? So a lot of the questions that we got from the recent webinars, what does it mean for farmers with SFI pilot agreements? So if you do have a pilot agreement, it is for 3 years and it will continue. So you will continue to deliver the existing 8 SFI pilot standards that you have in your agreements. I appreciate the ones that we have published. When they are available, they are going to look a little bit different, but you will continue to deliver the 8 existing standards. And it's really important part of the learning and co-design process that you continue with these agreements, because we've used your feedback to develop the new offer, and we will continue to use your feedback on the delivery of those standards to revise and update that offer to make sure that it works for farmers on the ground. So we're looking at how we maybe be able to offer you the opportunity to add new standards not available in the pilot to your agreement. So for some of you may be aware that we're looking at new standards around integrated pest management and nutrient management, for example, and we're looking, because they're not available in the pilot, how we may be able to add those to your agreement or have another agreement that sits alongside your pilot agreement that allows you to deliver those. So we're looking at those, and more details will be coming out later this year about whether we can do that or not. We can have the next slide, Liz, please. So the existing standards that we have available in SFI 22 and the 6 new standards that we have available in SFI 23 will be available to pilot participants on land that you don't have in the pilot. So if you haven't got your whole holding in the pilot, you could have another agreement that sits alongside your pilot agreement on that land that picks up your SFI 22 standards, but you could also choose to enter in some of the SFI 23 standards as well. And just a reminder, whilst we'd like you to continue to deliver the pilot, you do have the flexibility to amend your agreements at the annual change windows. If there is things that you want to do that will allow you that flexibility, you can do that. So we just thought we'd take this opportunity just as a brief reminder of the ongoing learning activities and what's coming up next. So we've had a few questions about the land management plans and what's happening next with those. So please do continue to review and update your land management plans. We've done lots of learning activities, and I'm sure you've been involved in surveys on the land management plans during the first year of the pilot. That will continue. So we've got more planned learning activities on the land management plan coming up later on this year. So please do keep reviewing and updating your land management plans. Similar with the learning journal, please do continue to review and update your pilot learning journal on the frequency that suits you best. Obviously, we've got templates out there, so please do look at our pilot site that shows you example templates of learning journals if you're struggling, or just as a brief reminder what to put in your learning journals. We've got some examples on the slide today of some of the learning journals that people have sent us. Some are handwritten, some are typed up, just of the details that people are keeping just on what's it like to implement your standards, perhaps some of the issues that you are encountering when you implement the standards, or some of the solutions that you've came up with, some of the decisions that you've made, something that wasn't quite clear in your guidance, or for example, how you felt about the annual declaration process. Did you get enough notice to complete your annual declaration? Was it clear what you were doing and signing up to your annual declaration? So please record all your thoughts and observations in your pilot journal, because they're a really useful source if you're invited along to our learning activities that we can draw on. So we do continue with the survey, so please do continue to complete your surveys if you find them in your inbox. And also we'll be having some workshops coming up, and we'll be seeking volunteers for those. So if you are interested, please do volunteer for those. And we send out our monthly newsletter, so we get great feedback on our monthly newsletter. So please continue to read those, because I think there's an update in terms of what's happening in the pilot and what's coming up. So in terms of our learning activities, what's coming up next? So please do look out for our tracking survey. So this is an annual survey that we do that asks you about how you're getting on with your pilot agreement, what's working, and it's your opportunity to tell us what's working well and what's not working well. What we particularly like to hear about in this tracking survey is about costs. So there will be some questions on the costs of implementation of the standards in your survey and what it's costing you. So please do have a think about those and reflect on what you've put in your learning journal when you complete that tracking survey, because that's going to be really valuable when we review our payment rates and our approach to payment and what it costs to deliver those standards. We're also there'll also be a capital grant survey. So for those of you that have participated in capital grants, we're doing a survey on that. So please do take the time to complete that. And we are looking at doing an annual declaration workshop later this month. So for those of you that have been through that process, we're keen to get your reflections on what's worked well and what hasn't. So please do sign up for that when you see the link if you are interested. So we'll send these slides around so you can see a couple of examples if you just want a useful reminder of some of those pilot, what to put in your pilot learning journal, but any of your reflections is really helpful and useful. Okay, next slide, please. So if we move on to our Q&A sessions, I can see people have been busily putting questions in the Q&A. So please do take the opportunity to review, if you have a question, to review the ones that's already in there, and we'll try and get to as many as possible. We have around 25 minutes for questions, so we'll take as many as we possibly can. We've just we had a few questions about the type of webinar that we're having today. So today we're trying to get as much information across to you as possible. So it is an information giving webinar. So unfortunately, we can't see everybody. We have a lot of people. We've got in excess of 190 pilot farmers on the call. So it would be impossible for us to see everybody, but we do have lots of opportunities, for example, workshops and further webinars that we'll be running where we will be able to see everybody on camera. But just today's session was about trying to get as much information across to you as possible, which is why we've done it in the format. So it's not to say that we're not interested to hear from you. We are, and we have our workshops coming up, and we're really keen to hear from you about how these processes are working for you. But just because we had lots of questions about the processes and how they're working, we thought we'd run today's webinar. So we hope we found that helpful. So just looking at the Q&A, we will try and get through as many of these questions as we possibly can. You will see there's two tabs. There's an open tab and an answered tab. So the team in the background, while Sam, Liz and I have been talking, have been trying to answer as many of those questions. So if you think, oh, I've put a question up there and it's gone, it may be in the answered tab. So please do scan the answered tab as well, because we may have answered some of those questions already for you. Again, if you do have a specific question about your agreement, please do email us separately about that, because it's probably best that we answer that offline than getting into questions about individual agreements on these. But if you do have a general question, we are happy to answer them here. So the first question that I've got is from Nicholas, and it's about their capital agreement that started on the 5th of December. And you've been told that by phone that you get the 2023 rate, as you haven't started work or any of activity, and you're still waiting for this to be confirmed. So Nicholas, that is still the case. We are working through those agreements, and we will be reissuing those so that you get the 2023 rates. Chris, is there anything that you wanted to add to that? Chris?
I can answer, Louise, if you like.
Thanks, Dawn. That would be really helpful.
Having issues with his laptop, yeah. So we'll be, for those customers, we will be going out shortly with the Capitals team. Will be coming out to those customers shortly, so it'll be in the next week or so, just to let them know what's going on with their agreements, individual cases.
Excellent, that's great. Thanks, Dawn, and thanks for the update. So if you haven't heard, you will be hearing from RPA very shortly on that. So I've got a question from Andrew about the balance of capital to top up the grant to come with the absence of the basic payment scheme when the level of profit in food production is so low. So what we've recently done, Andrew, is reviewed the capital rates, and this is the exercise that the previous question was referring to. So we have updated the rates for capital items from the beginning of January. So for anybody that applies from that date, they will have access to those new rates. What we're doing for those that haven't started activity on the, they had an agreement already and they haven't started their activity, as we just outlined, RPA getting in touch, making sure that if they haven't started activity, and we can issue new agreements for those new rates on capital. So I hope that takes away that we are reviewing those rates and we're making sure that they are kept up to date. Sam, anything you wanted to add to that?
Thanks, Louise. No, I think, and I think also just from a pilot perspective, it's, obviously the pilot is helping us learn to, what works well, what works not quite so well, and how we can improve things for the full scheme, where we can, where we can sort of roll it out to a larger number of people. So I think having, as BPS reduces, having this learning early on is going to really help the wider farming population in that transition as the new schemes, come out and the offers widened. So that's why the feedback that we're getting through the pilot now is really important, both on the capital side and on the full scheme side.
We've got a question in regard to mapping. So I think this is one for Alex, Chris and Dawn from RPA. So in respect of maps, if they are being checked, what happens when the map changes? So sometimes our maps change and we gain some that aren't ours and we lose some that are. So what advice would you have to those pilot farmers? Alex, Chris, Dawn, is there anybody that can
Sorry,
come in
Liz,
in
which
terms of-
question was at the top?
So this is a question, so I'll just repeat the question. So this is just regard to maps and how we check in them and what contact we have with pilot participants if we do change an agreement because maps change.
And
Yeah,
we've had no sorry, Alex, I was going to say, Alex, probably best to
Yeah,
answer that.
I mean, I was just going to say, I think it'd probably be best just to get in touch direct with the specific example. If you get in touch with us directly, and then someone can take a look at it. Just without the further detail, I'm not sure whether we'd know exactly. But yeah, if you do email into the RPA, then someone can take a look at it for you.
Thanks, Alex. I think there's a general question there, though. However, so if we do a mapping exercise and the agreement changes, do we get in touch with the pilot farm and let them know beforehand?
I think if it was in relation to an eligibility check that we were undertaking on the pilot, then yes, we would. I don't know if Chris has got anything additional.
Sorry, I've been having all sorts of IT problems, but yeah, no, absolutely, Alex, you're right. That if it was linked directly to some of the internal work that we're carrying out, we do that every quarter, then that will be directly communicated by us.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So it's RPA will be getting in touch with you. That's really helpful. Thank you. So Chris, perhaps this is a follow-up question. So why are payments put on hold when there are mapping updates? Should that be the case?
At the moment, and this is where some of the, because it's a pilot, and quite often we've kind of said this, because it's a pilot, we're designing a lot of the guidance and the policy as we go, using some of the live cases that we're seeing. So some of these examples where we are having mapping updates now, what we've had to do then is use those in real time, and then in effect be able to, if there's, let's say, a reduction in in a parcel and some of the standards, etc., then that will have an impact on the payments. And in effect, we're currently working through being able to amend people's agreements and in effect reflect that slight reduction in the payment. So that's why it's taking a little bit of time, simply with some of these areas of activity that we've got a slight backlog with some of the site visits, some of the amendments, some of these slight reductions in payments, and in effect we'll clear those in the next 6 weeks, I would have thought, and then in effect be getting back to where we really want to be. It's part of the whole work that we've been doing on the pilot, to be perfectly honest. That isn't to try and hide the fact that this is a pilot and this is why some of the payments have got on hold. It's just the nature of the pilot is we're kind of designing it as we go, in effect, to then better inform us going into SFI 22, SFI 23. But again, I appreciate that that's work that we have to sort of try and get sorted ASAP, so people can in effect basically get on and get their payments sorted.
Thanks, Chris. So we've got a question here. Will the amendment process also apply to countryside stewardship agreements? So we are looking to roll out this amendment process that we are testing in the pilot to the main sustainable farming incentive scheme. But I think what is fair to say is that we understanding what works in the pilot, what's worked well, what hasn't worked well, and we'll take that into account once we roll it out into the sustainable farming incentive scheme. Ollie, I can see you've got a question around grazing dates of cover crops. So we will take that offline and get back to us. If you could just email your SBI number, that would be really helpful to our SFI Pilot learning address, and then we will get back to you individually about your agreement. And Ollie, I'm sorry, nobody's got back to you about that. Just trying to have a look around the question. Sam, any questions you can see we can answer?
Louise, I think there's still a couple of questions about I think the offer for SFI 23 and the new standards that that are being rolled out. And obviously we covered that in quite a bit of detail in our last webinars, and you mentioned it just now. But I think just to say that obviously the standards that are going to be coming online in due course later this year, you know, have been developed with a lot of the feedback that lots of you have given us, you know, throughout doing you know, your work and the learning activities that we've done. What we are looking to find out is if we can, if there is any flexibility in allowing to those that have got pilot agreements to consider some of those standards as well, particularly where they are quite different. The actions within are quite different to those that we've got in the pilot, but obviously there are some that are you know, still quite similar, and we do have that principle through all our schemes of not paying for the same things twice, or where actions can be at odds with one another. So we are looking at that to see what flexibility we can build into the scheme, into the pilot scheme, and how that can work going forward. And obviously the details that we've launched for the standards for 2023 that will be available, they're not available just yet anyway. They'll be coming online later this year, so we'll probably have more information about that, I think. But just to I know that's come up a few times today and in previous discussions we've had.
Thanks, Sam. That's really helpful. So we've got a question here from a customer around the hedgerow standard, where they've had issues with mapping their hedges, and actually the length of hedges increased. They're asking, will there be updates to their payment rate for the first year of the agreement because of these changes in the hedges? Chris, I don't know whether you know the answer to that question, or we need to take that one offline.
To be 100%, I would like to take that one offline, and then we'll come back to them.
Thanks, Chris. So we've got a question from Trudy Harrison here. It's about their particular agreement. So what I'd advise, Trudy, if you wouldn't mind, would you mind please emailing the SFI Pilot Learning email address with your SBI number, and we'll look into that one. So I'm really sorry that you haven't had any communications about your payment being held, but we will look into that as a priority. But if you give us if you send us your SBI, we'll be able to look into that in a bit more detail.
And Louise, I think I've seen a few of these appear, which I can only apologise for if people haven't had regular communication. I think just to echo your point, Louise, I think if people can email the details through, we will categorically ensure that someone's in touch within 48 hours.
Okay, thank you. So there is quite a few here actually where I can see there's a couple of people. So if you have submitted a question around your individual agreement, if you've got a payment hold on, you're not quite sure where that is, please do email us with your SBI. Any other details, Chris, that we need, or is it just the SBI number?
SBI and name farm. Only because in case you get a typo on the SBI, it's easier for us to then be able to kind of make sure we know who we're dealing with.
Thank you. Sam, any other questions?
There was a couple, Louise, I've just seen. There was one about how payment rates that are going to be updated. So I think we updated you in our January newsletter to say that with the review of the countryside stewardship rates, the SFI pilot rates were also being updated in line with those where relevant. So where they were updated in CS, they're also being changed in the pilot. So our plan for those were to be ready for the Q1 payment. And I think unless my RPA colleagues say otherwise, I think we had that ready for the payments for the first quarter payments, which would have started in beginning of this month of February. So you should see a change in your so if the rates have changed, they have changed on your agreement, because they haven't changed on every standard, but just where the review has changed them, they'll be effective from the start of your year 2 agreements, which for some people start in November 2022. So you should start to see them filtering through in the new payments now. I think there was also one, Louise, about is there any plan to continue the pilot after the 3 years? And I think at this stage, again, we are looking at the sort of transition, but I think the pilot is sort of running for this fixed sort of period of time, and we'll be looking to transition or looking to how, you know, what's best for you, what's best for all of your individual agreements as to go into a new scheme, whether that be SFI, CS, or a combination of both when we get towards the end of the pilot period and the learning that we're doing through the pilot.
Thanks, Sam. That's really helpful. We've got a question from a pilot participant, Andrew Long, and again, it's around receiving the amendment and approval for your amendment and not being able to see the relevant section to be able to approve that amendment. Andrew, what I suggest you do, it looks as though you may have an issue with permissions, but let's look into that in a further detail for you. Again, if you send your SBI through to us, and we'll look into that and pick that one up for you. Chris, unless there's anything you wanted to add to that.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Louise.
Thank you. So we've got a question again around what pilot farmers can do and what they can, what you can add. So there are 8 standards that we've got in the pilot. If what you can do is you can add other standards at your annual amendment window. If you wish to add any of the other standards or wish to increase the level of ambition on your land, you can absolutely do so. If you wish to add land into the pilot, on the amendment date, you can, on the anniversary date of your agreement, you can also add more land into the pilot. As we've said, there are going to be the other standards that's available, the 3 that's already available through the live SFI scheme that was available in 2022, and the 6 new ones that we're going to be available for later this year. A lot of those are very similar to what you're doing already and are available in the pilot. There are 2 of those that we know that aren't available, and we're looking into the possibility of how you may be able to either add those into your agreement or have an agreement running inside if you wish to continue those on your land. So if you are thinking about increasing the ambition level or adding standards in, please do that during your annual amendment window.
Louise, there was one on the capital grants process. So we had a query about how many times you can apply, and I think that is correct in terms of the question. You can apply more than once, but you have to have, you know, if you make an application, that application has to be completed and the claim completed before you can make a second application again. I see Dawn's nodding, so that is how the system works. So you are free to make more than one application, but we can't have more than one live application running at the same time.
Thanks, Sam. We've got a question about the guidance. Where is the guidance for capital grants? So we will get a link and share that with you in the chat. So one of the team will send a link to where the capitals is. It is available on gov.uk, but we'll send you a link so you can just click directly through to that. And if we can't do it now, we will make sure we send it out, circulate it with the slides as well, so you can have a look at that. So we've got a question, do I recall there being changes made to the payment structure since the update surrounding countryside stewardship? So yes, for those of you that have read our recent newsletter that we published earlier this month, you will see that from the 1st of January, we have updated the pilot revenue rates in line with the CS increases. So for your next quarterly payment that you will be receiving, for the second year of your agreement, so for some of you, this will be the up and coming payment that you'll receive this month, you should see the increases in those rates. And please check out the newsletter for further details. And we've also updated the blog online, or are in the process of doing so, which sets out the updated rates. So we've got we will make sure that we send the link out to the blog as well if you're not already, because it's a really valuable, useful source of information if you are. Got a good question here, Chris. I don't know whether you can answer this, but is there a typical wait for confirmation of a scheme amendment?
Typically, it would be across any scheme. It would normally be 2 months, but we would aim to do it before that. admittedly, like I said before, we do have a slight backlog of where we are now, but as soon as we do basically get into as soon as we clear those, we would anticipate clearing those way before the 2 months are up. So people will be hearing very, very shortly after they submit one.
Thanks, Chris. We've got a good question here from Jonathan. Can we exit our pilot agreement if we want to apply for the SFI 23 standards on the same land? So we are looking at what you would need to do if you wish to do that. So we'll be coming out with more details later when we launch SFI 23 about what that will entail. We very much hope you wish to stay in the pilot, because I said it's a really valuable source of learning and feedback. And we know that a lot of you have just finished year one of the pilot and are starting year two, and we're just building up that knowledge and aware of how it's going, implementing these standards, what's working and what's not. So it's really valuable that we have the pilot running alongside the live scheme. But if you did wish to do that, we will be coming out with some guidance later this year. We've got a question about how do I submit receipts for a capital grant. I can see that we're typing an answer to that. Chris, I don't know whether you want to come in while we type the answer to that one.
Dawn, is that you typing an answer out of interest?
It's me. I can come in. So
sorry,
Alex,
I knew
not
one
me.
of the two.
I was
No,
trying
that's
to unmute
okay.
myself
So
quickly.
yeah, you can sign into the rural payments service and submit one online. The specific detail around how you do that is on gov.uk, or if you can't do that, then you can ask us for a claim form. So there's a couple of different ways that can be done.
Thanks, Alex. We've got a question from Paul. Appreciate this may not be one we can answer, but we can take it away if not. So when we remap a farm, is it possible to see on a website which parcels have been removed from the pilot? Chris and colleagues, I don't know whether there's an answer to that one, or we can take that one away.
I think that's one we'll take away, and we can talk to our mapping colleagues to see what can and can't be done on that one. We'll take that one away there.
Thank you. So I've got a question from Hannah about the capital items that are available through the SFI pilot. Are they different to the Countryside Stewardship Capital Scheme? So we do have a separate pilot offer. You can apply for Countryside Stewardship if you have existing Countryside Stewardship on your land. We have essentially taken the Countryside Stewardship offer that's available and applied it to the pilot. So it's what types of capital items do you need to help you with your pilot agreement, and we've put those in. But what we've also done is, because we're testing and learning in the pilot, so some of those capital items in Countryside Stewardship, you may have needed to obtain advice from either sometimes Natural England, the Environment Agency, or the Forestry Commission, or you may have needed specific permissions to undertake those capital works. What we've done is we're trying to test using some of those without those advice and without some of those permissions that you needed through Countryside Stewardship. So it is the same offer, but some of the advice, you don't need some of the advice that you'd require through the capital ones. But if you go online, and Liz has popped the guidance in the chat for you to have a look at, it takes you through that, what capital items are available, how they're linked to the standards that's available, the rate that's on offer, and what you would need to put in place to apply for those capital grants. So we've got, still with capital grants, we've got another good question. Do we need to complete and pay for all the capital items in our agreement before we can claim?
That one, Louise, it depends what it is. So you can actually pay and claim for individual items one at a time. So it doesn't have to be all in one go, and there might be several capital items, but as long as you pay for them, completed them in full, claim for them. So it depends what you've got under your agreement. So that might be one just to take to the side.
Thank you.
It's definitely, obviously it depends on what item you've actually got under your agreement for that answer.
Thanks, Dawn. So we've got a question from, we've got time just for a couple more questions. So I'll take this one from Charles. So will SFI payment rate match CS rates? So the rates in the pilot are based on the CS rates, so they're calculated using the actions that we have in CS, but they're not always the same because we have a variety of different actions within the standards. They're not exactly the same as anything that we have in CS. So whilst they are based on CS rates and increase in line with the CS rates, there's nothing comparable that we can equate them to or be similar to what we've got in CS, but I hope that helps answer that question. Sam, anything that you can see that we haven't answered that we've got the opportunity to take now?
Louise, I was just going to say there was one question from Andrew about the hedgerow pilot group, so just to update that, obviously we're doing quite a bit of different learning activities throughout the pilot with different on the different standards as well as the different elements of the pilot itself. So we will be doing more work and more learning on the hedgerow within the hedgerow standard within the pilot group as well as we go through the next year. In terms of the group, that I know that some of our pilot participants sat on a practitioner working group to help develop the new scheme, and I think as we've just recently published the information about what's going to be available for 2023, I think they'll be looking at what they need to do next and what input they need going forward as we iterate those and as we concentrate on the wider scheme as well. So there'll be more coming about that, but that's why that's why we were sort of preparing for the offer for 2023, and then we'll look at what we do next going forward.
Thanks, Sam. And we've got one final question here from Robert asking about feedback on improvements and making the point, very rightly so, that sometimes changes happen over time and it takes longer than it takes years sometimes for changes to happen. And that is why we're really keen for the pilot to run for 3 years, for us to have that full 3-year period to learn what's not working and what's not, and what improves and help and works over time. So the annual declaration process, it was very new this time. It's something that we haven't done before. How does the second round of the annual declaration process compare and contrast to the first round we've had? So it's extremely valuable in allowing us to do that. And I completely take your point that it's really important that we take the pilot over the course of a 3-year period, but equally, because we have a live scheme now up and running, we need to make sure that we make the most valuable use of your learning to date to share that for how we develop the new schemes and design the new schemes so that they are working for you, which is what the pilot is all about. So I hope you found today's session useful. We've tried to get through as many of your questions as we can. If you do have individual questions, again, please do email us with your individual SBI numbers on the name of your farm and your agreement holder so that we can follow up on those. So just a brief reminder of what we've got coming up. So we've got a couple of more webinars. So we've got one on landscape recovery. So we've heard from a number of pilot farmers who are interested to hear about landscape recovery, what the purpose of it is, what we're trying to do with that scheme. So we're putting on some webinars in March about that. And then we've had a year of the pilot, and what we're keen to share with you is what we've learned during the first year of the pilot in terms of what's working and what's not. So we are going to have some feedback sessions on that to tell you what we've learned later on in March. So we will be sign-ups coming out to you very soon, and again about those two topics, about landscape recovery and about their feedback. But we are keen to hear from you if there's anything else you would like to talk about on webinars, or what other types of learning activities you'd like to see. So if there is anything you would like to see, please do let us know. So I think before you go, we have a short a survey. Just we're keen to hear about your session today. So there's a poll there just that we've launched. Please do tell us, take the opportunity to tell us how useful it is today's session, because this will tell us whether to put more of these on or not if you find them useful. We've just got our email addresses there if you do want to get in touch, if you do have a specific query about your agreement. And I do think we have a survey that we are going to launch as well, where you will have the opportunity, if there's something else you'd like to have a webinar on or a specific learning activity, please do let us know. So I'll just keep the webinar open for 1 more minute to give you the opportunity to complete the poll, and then we'll close. But we very much hope that you have found today's session useful.